Hello, this is Robert Rickover. I'm an Alexander Technique teacher in Omaha, Nebraska, and my guest is Imogen Ragone, an Alexander teacher in Wilmington, Delaware. We both these days teach mostly online. And I have a topic that I'd like to discuss with Imogen, but as usual, I have not given her any warning about what the topic is in the interest of spontaneity, I guess.
Yes, I have no idea.
Maybe deviousness, who knows? Anyway, so the topic I want to talk today about and discuss, I have some things I want to say, but I'm sure Imogen will have plenty of things too. The general topic is inhibition, Alexander Technique inhibition.
Okay.
You could say that the beauty of this topic is that no matter what you say, you're going to offend somebody.
Thanks, Robert.
I mean, really, seriously, it's one of these topics so there's endless debates about what it means and in the Alexander world. I think one thing most Alexander teachers would agree on, it is not Freudian inhibition, suppressing your feelings, that kind of stuff, bottling stuff in. But it's more about choice, and it's more about deciding that there's something you don't want to do, and you give yourself an instruction along those lines, perhaps, or there are various ways to inhibit. And that's actually what I really want to talk about is, and this is, I should say, this is inspired by the recent uptick in interest in Margaret Goldie's work. She was one of Alexander's first teachers who was trained by her even before the first training course, and she was very close to Alexander. And when Alexander died, she continued to teach for many years, and she was not terribly happy about what most other teaching in I guess London, where she was about. She was a big believer in inhibition, although she did not, I don't know that she used that word a lot. She talked about stopping a lot, not to do was a phrase of hers. And she felt that was absolutely primary to getting the benefits of the technique, which is not something I was exposed to on my training course. I don't know about you, but we never talked about inhibition really, or certainly not how to accomplish it on my training course. Well, what was your experience with that concept?
I'm trying to remember, because we definitely talked about it, but But
did anyone ever give you, okay, it's a good thing to inhibit? How do you do it?
I remember Daria, who was my training course director, excellent teacher, but I remember her one time when we were talking about it, giving the I was thinking the thing about the gearbox in the car and being in neutral, but I actually think that was a different thing. That wasn't.
That was Marjorie Barlow, Alexander's take on inhibition. It was like neutral.
No, Daria used a car metaphor in a different way for something else completely. I mean, I certainly do remember kind of the idea of non-doing and which seems related, especially to what you just were saying Miss Goldie was talking about. And yet I also would say they're not exactly the same thing.
Well,
or maybe they are.
I mean,
you can tell that I've been put on the spot with this conversation.
No, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I just know from my experience training, yeah, the term came up, but I don't remember anyone ever saying, well, now here's how you could, I hate to say do it because it's not something you do, but how can you nudge yourself into that place where you are in fact inhibiting in an effective manner? That seems to me to be a kind of an unanswered question by and
I'm
large.
thinking back to lessons and my training course. And, you know, I don't want to do a disservice because I had a wonderful training. I know we talked about pausing, but it isn't just about pausing. But I certainly do think hands-on work is helping the student inhibit before you do something, but maybe it's not overtly talked about what is happening so much.
Right. And as I said, we never discussed how you would achieve it, so to speak.
Well, we did actually, we did play, because Dario is an actor, and we used a lot of games in my training to explore different ideas. And I know we certainly used some games that had the idea of inhibition behind them, like red light, green light, Simon Says, things like that, which if you don't stop and think, you're going to just do the habitual, the instruction, you know. So yeah.
So what I became interested in was, let me get my notes out here. Because, you know, obviously inhibition's a powerful process. But I realized that until really quite recently, I had not thought through how I might get to the place where I was taking advantage of that. Let's put it that way. And so I'd like to go through all the ways that I'm aware of that that could happen. Two of them you've already mentioned, by the way, a teacher's hands and games. I put them in a category that I'm going to list various things.
Of ways that you can learn or experience.
Could take advantage of this concept, which is basically putting yourself in a mental state where you're not you're sort of open to anything happening. You're not deciding what's going to happen.
But it's also interrupting what might be the automatic pattern or response, right? Yeah.
Right, exactly. And let me just say, this interview is probably not going to make much sense to people who are not Alexander teachers or students. And I also want to say it's kind of an exploratory interview in that I'm grappling with the issue in a public way. I'm not saying I've got the answer, but I am interested in the question how to inhibit. And for me personally, the way that I favor and that I find very effective is to use inhibitory directions. And some of them have been around for quite a while, like negative, sort of paradoxical negative directions, like you think to yourself, I'm not walking as you're walking, or I'm not breathing, or I'm not lying down, or whatever you're doing, you just think to yourself, I'm not doing it. And that certainly changes the quality of what you do. And I would say pretty much always for the better.
Yes, because and I'm thinking
saying no to your habitual way of doing. You're basically saying to your prefrontal cortex is saying to the rest of you, as I say, for example, walk across the room, saying I'm not walking. You're saying, well, come up with a better way than the one I habitually use.
I'm also thinking this type of direction, if you want to call it a direction, is inhibition a direction? That's an open another question.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking they're ones you can use during an activity to inhibit, using the terminology, the patterns or the habits that you don't want during it, right? But there's also the before an activity, like you're getting ready to get up from a chair, the kind of classic chair work thing. And you could use that sort of idea about, I'm not getting up from the chair, or I'm not doing, I'm not, to lower that end gaining response, that eagerness to get up, and then help you be with the means whereby to,
Right.
which could be, one means whereby could be to continue thinking, I'm not
Absolutely.
getting up, so yeah.
And sort of one other thing I want to say is, I think inhibition is not, I think there are degrees of inhibition. I don't think it's a strictly binary thing. I'm either inhibiting or I'm not inhibiting.
I agree too.
Some people
sometimes
are
it
able
is
to do a certain amount of inhibiting, and then, or a certain level of it, but maybe they can't sustain it very long, or maybe they can inhibit a bit, but not as much as they could.
They're like lessening the strength of the habit, but it's not like it's gone.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and the particular direction that I find very helpful is these days is I'm not doing, which kind of covers everything. I mean, it covers things that you just don't want to do, like tighten your neck, but it also covers things that you want to do differently. And when you think to yourself, I'm not doing, the rest of your body figures out which one of those is appropriate right now for that particular thing. You don't have to worry about that. You just put out that thought, and the rest of you takes over. And I think that's kind of how it works.
Yeah.
And so that's a pretty nice way to do it, because you get the benefits of inhibition and you just have this very light thought to get there.
That actually reminds me of something, because I've heard some people say that you need to know what you're inhibiting to be able to inhibit. And I don't think that's true. I think sometimes I can just, like you say, I could just deliver that I'm not doing, for instance.
Yeah.
And there wasn't anything specific that I was conscious of. And yet it helps me let go of some extra tensions,
Yeah.
that I wasn't aware of.
I totally agree. I mean,
so there's both. You can sometimes you know.
Yep.
And sometimes you don't know. And
you don't need to know what all your dysfunctional habits are.
Thank goodness.
They'll be taken care of anyway. Now, the thing is that, like any kind of direction, it's got to be delivered in a way that's useful. And that means very light thought, very no oomph to it. You're just saying, hey, this is what I want. And you guys figure it out.
So can I interrupt you? That strikes me that we have to inhibit our normal way or habitual way of thinking to deliver the inhibitory thought in an inhibitory way.
Absolutely. Yes, we do. We do.
So, yeah.
And I think a danger of any kind of self-talk about pausing or inhibiting or whatever is that you can slightly overdo it. And then you don't, well, let me give you an example of that I noticed in an interview just a couple of years after I first started teaching in Toronto. There were a bunch of people assembled to talk about some topic, I don't know, back pain or something. And one of them was an Alexander teacher who I knew. And they were all sitting around the table, and the host was asking questions. And the host asked a question of this guy, and I could just see he was inhibiting and he inhibited just too much, and he didn't get a chance to answer the question.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's because maybe his idea was he had to do a little more than he thought he had to do to inhibit. He had an idea he had to actually do something instead of just putting out this thought without any intent to do anything about the thought. So that's a little danger of that approach. But I think that for most Alexander teachers, there are some what I would call traditional Alexander ways of achieving inhibition, two of which you mentioned, as I said earlier, a teacher's hands. If a teacher's acquired that ability to do it themselves and they have hands that reflect that, and they put those hands on you in a way that you can absorb that or somehow tune into it. And apparently Margaret Goldie was a master of that. And I think in her own way, Marjorie Barstow was a master of that, although she wouldn't have called it that. So that's certainly a classic Alexander way to learn how to inhibit. Go to a teacher who has learned and get the benefit of it. Now, it doesn't even have to be hands-on. Just being in the presence of someone who is looking after themselves in that way, and maybe even the presence online.
Oh, well, I very much agree with you that our presence is received by other people. If I'm all like this, you're going to feel it. I'm hopefully
notice, at some level, I'm going to pick up on it. Yeah.
And if you're in a teaching role, that it's even it's a little bit more the emphasis on the teacher's coordination, use, whatever words you want to use, is maybe a little emphasized more than the students in what is picked up and transferred. However, I don't know if that's inhibition, if it's unconscious, although maybe the hands-on is unconscious. You're getting me into all sorts of mind game trouble.
You see, there would be teachers who'd be very upset about it being unconscious, and there'd be teachers that think, oh, that's just fine. That's a good way to do it. Hang out with someone who has already learned, and you can benefit from it.
Apparently humans, we are designed to imitate each other.
We are, yeah.
And so if we can be conscious of that, we can decide what we want to imitate and what we don't want to imitate. And as teachers, we can be very responsible of ourselves, because we know that our students will not just be taking in the words, they will be taking in
us. Yeah. So we mentioned teachers' hands. Games certainly can be used to get someone into a place where they're inhibiting. The kind of game, you might call it a game, that FM himself engaged in, that he talks about in Use of the Self, where I forget whether he's like maybe sitting in a chair and he thinks, well, I could stand up, I could not stand up, or I could do something totally different, like raise my hand. There are a bunch of things I could do. So he's giving them all kind of equal weight, and none of them, he hasn't committed to any of them. So that commitment is what can cause the problem, because if you commit to standing up even before you stand up, all kinds of stuff is kicked into place in your habitual way. So he kind of widens the field of things you might do, and then he decides to do one, or maybe he doesn't. He's never committed to it until he actually does it.
Mhm.
I mean, that's a pretty powerful method that he came up with. And he actually outlines it pretty clearly in Use of the Self. Anyone can read that.
Yeah, I use not that exactly, but that same, I have a kind of an activity or game that I do with a lot of people that kind of uses that idea, which I have to credit Mead Andrews because it actually came from her, but obviously
Okay.
she got it from them, or it came from.
Well, and, just and to close out the category, let's say, of traditional Alexander ways to get there, constructive rest is probably a pretty good way for some people. You're especially constructive rest where you don't have to do anything. So like your knees are supported by something, so that you're in a place where it's pretty clear that there's nothing you have to do to be there. And you can afford to let go of all kinds of ideas about what's necessary to be lying in this place. You're conscious, you're lying down in a particular structure that tends to encourage expansion of your body without you having to worry about doing it. And there's nothing you have to do to be there. You could just kind of just be there.
I never quite thought of it like that. I've thought that you could practice inhibition while you are in constructive rest, because it gets things get a lot clearer. Like, for instance, if you play the game of raising a hand in the air while you're lying down, it's much clearer how quickly things are kicking in because you've got the feedback from the
absolutely, that's one way to do it.
But that's interesting, thinking of the act in itself as an inhibitory act.
Well, for a lot of people,
because they're inhibiting their life. Yes.
If someone's got a lot of background tension and stuff going on, you want to get them to chill out before you really do any sort of formal
absolutely.
And constructive rest is a pretty good way to do that.
I agree.
So you might say it's a pre-inhibitory, it could be a pre-inhibitory process. Putting yourself in a place where you could inhibit more easily, something like that. So those are kind of, can you think of any other kind of traditional Alexander ways to achieve inhibition? Because those are the only ones I've come up with.
Traditional.
Well, that any Alexander teacher listening would say, oh yeah, I know about that. Or student, yes, that's something that I use or know about. Because I can't think of any others, but
off the top of my head, I can't. No.
Okay, well then let's move to the non-traditional ones. And one that crossed my mind is meditation. That can certainly take you to a place of quietness, which might be pretty akin to Alexander inhibition. I don't know. To me, it seems like it does take away a lot of the internal chatter that's going on in my head, just to meditate for 15 or 20 minutes. It's possible that drugs could do it. I don't know. I mean, I can imagine that they might, and that might not be the best strategy, but it might work. And for me personally, the non-Alexander method that has actually, where I've really felt like I really was inhibiting or in that space of inhibition, has been craniosacral therapy, where you're there, but there's no doing anywhere that you can detect. Yeah. So those are the ones I can think of. But I'd also like to end with an example from a very different world.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to thinking about non-traditional ways. I mean, I use practice or etude that I learned from Mio Morales's Primal Alexander work
Okay,
these
yeah.
days as a primary method to help people practice
Mm-hmm.
inhibition, which kind of starts off with the idea of pause, but then becomes more than, and hopefully can be something that's just, you know, like that.
So, I mean, he talks about noticing ease, for example.
Mhm.
Was
Yeah,
that what you're talking about, or something else?
yeah. He has a little movement sequence where you practice pausing before each movement, and then you add in during the pause, you giving yourself doing a little bit of constructive thinking. So you're practicing doing that before, and then you're practicing doing it during and even after. So you're practicing inhibiting
Mm-hmm.
in this kind of a way away from your life that might mean that then when I go to reach my glass, which I think is what any Alexander teacher would want, that I might have a moment to like, oh, I'm not reaching for my glass if we're going to use a inhibitory paradoxical direction, you know.
Right.
But you're actually taking it outside of life to practice it separately.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what I do these days. And there was something else I want to mention, and it's gone right now. Oh yeah, just the idea of saying no. We were talking about traditional Alexander teaching on inhibition, and that was something like saying no to a stimulus, like
Mm-hmm.
that internal that idea was used a lot in my early Alexander learning and training. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, saying no is a type of
Yeah.
kind of inhibition. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Patrick MacDonald, when he would teach, he would say things like, okay, I'm going to take you into the chair from standing, let's say. And your job is to say no, right? But the thing is, if you said no in the wrong way, he'd get really angry.
Yeah, exactly. Like you could like become immobile. But it's like you're not going to do anything to help. In that's what it means in that situation.
Yeah, that's what he meant by it. But yeah, I can remember some interesting interactions with him in that ground. But I think that was a way that he was teaching inhibition.
Yes.
As opposed to maybe like someone like Walter Carrington, who relied much more, I think, on just his basic being and personality. He was like this person that, being in his presence, it would kind of chill you out, you know?
I never actually got to work with him, but from what you've said and what I've heard other people say, you could kind of like, he was oozing inhibition, and it was just
he was oozing it. He was oozing serenity and everything being okayness. And I once asked him about when he would first start help giving people, let's say, homework assignments to do when they came to him for private lessons. And he told me, and it's always stayed with me because it's really his approach, he would do anything he possibly could do for the first 10 lessons to avoid any talk about the Alexander technique. He wanted to just give people the experience. And I think for his clientele, that might have been a pretty good strategy. It's not one that I use particularly, but that was his strategy. Get him chilled out, and then you could start talking about directions and stuff like that. So that was it. That was his approach. Anything else you can think of?
No, things may come to me afterwards, and I'm sure, people, teachers watching, and maybe students who are watching may chip in with their own ideas of activities or how they were taught it. And how they teach it, etc., etc. So,
Well, I want to end with an example that is from a completely different universe than the Alexander technique. And I think it's one that your husband would appreciate because it's from the world of chemistry.
okay.
A chemist, right?
He's a yes, he's a chemical physicist or a physical chemist. He's a chemist and a physicist.
Well, he will know about this.
Okay.
So this is an example. This is from the field of organic chemistry, which I think most people who know about it think may remember it as a class that you had to take if you were going to go to medical school. You needed, as an undergraduate, to take a course in organic chemistry, and that was a horrible experience for the majority of people who did it. I never did.
I never had the pleasure being in the British university system.
An absolutely dreadful experience. But in organic chemistry, the fundamental building block of organic chemistry is called the benzene ring, and it is like it kind of underlies the structure of all of organic chemistry. But for a long time, no one knew it was a ring, and no one knew what its structure was until a German chemist whose name is August Kekule. I think I've got that right. Discovered it. And how he discovered it is there are different versions of it, but one is that he was getting off a horse-drawn omnibus in London.
Okay.
And as he stepped off the bus, it came to him and an image of could be like and he describes it sometimes as he was like in a reverie, and he saw snakes chasing each other in a circle, and that gave him the idea of the benzene ring. Sometimes it's said that it's like other animals chasing each other in a circle, but basically what happened is he sort of was obviously not thinking about chemistry when he got off the bus, and he was maybe in some place in his head where an idea like that could just pop into his brain and he would know what to do with it. Now that's not useful for most of us to cultivate, but I think it's an example, a kind of version of inhibition that he engaged in.
You've made me think about if you're trying to, I don't know, write a blog, but you sit down at your desk, I have to do it, and then you go and take a walk, or you're in the shower, and then the ideas come, and it flows together. And there have been studies that we need these kind of open times when our mind can just wander, and it gives the space. Maybe the space is the inhibition, the space to actually pull these ideas together, or whatever it is, or come up with the solution to the problem, which when you were trying to find it, end gaining perhaps, or overly focused, so having these spaces in our lives. Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't quite related it exactly to inhibition, but just knowing that having these times when we're not sort of on task can actually help us be more creative, productive, because actually gives the space
Right.
for those things to happen.
Right. And it's not that all your previous work was wasted. It's just that, like, as you say, you take a break from ideas about a blog and take a shower. Those ideas recede very much into the background. And many of them may have been good ideas, but maybe some of them were a little limiting in some way. Who knows? And they all sort of float away, and then, oh wow, hey, I know how to do it. I'm gonna. I think you could get something similar to that. Maybe you could argue that certain kinds of dream states would get you there. I had the weird experience, and I don't know how relevant this is, but I'm going to throw it out anyway. When I first, not my very first semester, but the second semester of my Alexander training, for about a 2-month period, I had a number of what I would describe as precognitive dreams, which is, they felt different from regular dreams, and it was it had sort of a striking quality to them. I'd never had dreams like that before, and I really haven't had very many since. And the thing is that of the 3, 2 of them that were very specific came true, and there was no way I could have consciously had any awareness of that. They were highly specific events, and they came true within a week or 2 of my dream. So, I mean, who knows? But I think in that state, I wasn't putting any of the usual barriers into getting information for wherever you get that kind of information, and out popped a prediction of the future that was accurate. So
yeah, interesting. It does make me think about, that kind of state when you've woken up, but you're not kind of fully awake, but your mind's sort of going here, there, and everywhere. And often that's interesting. Yeah.
So anything else that you want to say about inhibition? It's your big chance.
That was I don't think I was inhibiting. I was trying. So that's actually, this is when you try to think of something, or like you're trying to remember someone's name, but it's when you've gone away and you're not trying anymore that suddenly that thing just comes. So that will probably happen.
So you inhibited in that case, in that example you just gave, you could say, well, I was not maybe consciously deciding to inhibit, but I essentially inhibited
the trying to
get to remember that name, and that maybe cleared the path for the name to just pop into conscious awareness.
Yeah, because you were, instead of being in a narrow focus, you were in an open.
Exactly. And so, I think our conversation, I'd like to think of it as just food for thought. I mean, I'm sure you would agree with me. It'd be fun to get some comments on this, right? And because this isn't the definitive podcast on inhibition.
Absolutely not. And we actually didn't really try and define it very specifically.
We could. You want to give your definition?
No, we'll leave that for now. I wasn't trying to. I was actually feeling like we're just leaving it. I think it was nice to leave it open,
Yeah, and there are lots of definitions of inhibition out there for anyone who wants to read about them. But I think in a way, it's something it's a tough thing to actually define precisely. It's my sense. Anyway, anything you want to add?
No. I was like, I could try, and then I could inhibit.
I think you were inhibiting just now. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll end on that note. I guess today has been Imogen Ragone, an Alexander teacher in Wilmington, Delaware. I'll put a link to her website by the interview, and there'll be some more information there as well. Imogen, thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.